اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام تباركت يا ذا الجلال والإكرام.
Indeed, all praise and thanks belongs to Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala alone. We seek His help, His assistance and guidance in all things. He whom Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala guides, there is none that can misguide him, and he whom Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala leads astray, there is none that can guide him except through the will of and permission of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala alone. And I bear witness and testify that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib al-Hashimi al-Qurashi was the final messenger and prophet sent to all of mankind. O you who believe, fear Allah. Fear Allah as He deserves to be feared, and do not die except in a state of Islam. Do not die except that you are Muslims. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Alhamdulillah, we have reached, this is lesson 49 in our reading of Ad-Da' wa Ad-Dawa' wa lillahi alhamd. We're close to that 52 mark, which means we've done it for a year. But something that is about today's lesson is that a lot of the material is repeated, and we're going to go over it a little bit faster so we can cover approximately 3 pages bi-idhnillahi tabarak wa ta'ala. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, as for its effects in the waning of the mind in one's livelihood, had it not been for the combined participation in this deficiency amongst everyone, the obedient one would have realized the deficiency of mind of the sinner, but the calamity is widespread and insanity is of different variations. Over here, we continue on with the effects of sin. And Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah in this paragraph is saying that sins affect the mind. And he says we could be able to quantify how bad the effect would be. However, the problem is that there is no group of people who do not sin. There's no one that doesn't sin after Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So because there's no group who does not commit sin, it's hard to say that, because sin is so widespread, how much the effect of sin is on the mind and the intellect. Right? So we could be able to compare them, he's saying over here, we could compare the two of sinners and those who don't sin and the effect of sin on the mind. He says, but because the problem is so rampant, it's so prevalent, and everyone has a taste of it, of sin, this is not possible to do so. But had it been the case, if there was a group of people who did not sin, then they would surely see the effect of sin in those who committed it. Right? So, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he continues and he says how peculiar of an affair it truly is. If the minds were sound, they would have understood that the way to attain pleasure, joy, happiness and a blissful existence is by pleasing the one who possesses all blessings, and pain and torment all comes as a result of angering him. In pleasing him you receive your eyes' delight, the joys of the soul, the life of the heart, the pleasure of one's inner self, and the most pleasant bounties. Ibn al-Qayyim over here, rahimahullah, he is saying that if the minds were sound, they would understand. Right? If the mind was thinking straight and it had complete logic, then it would understand joy, happiness and a blissful existence. Yani a perfect life insha'Allah, in the sense where he is able to feel the bounties of Allah, the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon him. He understands that this is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the opposite, where pain and torment, the punishment of is with who? Is in when you disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He controls whatever you gain, but it's in your hands. So he says the one who is sound in his mind, in his logic, in his thinking, when he understands the reality of everything, he understands that happiness is found in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his worship, nowhere else. Because if you try to seek happiness and joy and an existence that is pure and that which is good, if you try to find it anywhere other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you won't find it. And he says that if you try to chase it anywhere else, then it means you're going to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then when you disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're going to feel the pain, the misery, the torment, the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, we've taken all of these concepts previously. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he continues and he says, whereby if a seed's worth was measured against the luxuries of this world, they would not equate. If you took a seed, and I asked you just generally, this seed over here, let's just say it's a garlic seed, right? The granule, single granule of garlic. If I asked you, does this equate to, what do we use? What example today? A Lambo, okay? If I said, does this match up to an AMG? Okay, now let's bring it down a little bit, not to a Lamborghini, let's just bring it to an AMG, a Mercedes. Would you say they're the same? Now he's saying that if you took this granule, this seed, and you compared it to the rest of the pleasures of this world, the luxuries of this world, and you said, are they the same? You'd say no. So that is like what? If you try to trade in the dunya for the akhirah. If you try to trade in the dunya, which is this seed, in comparison to all of the luxuries that exist, it doesn't equate. So you're selling yourself what? Cheap. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, in fact, if the heart obtains the slightest portion, it would never settle for the pleasantries of this world as an alternative. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he's saying if the heart receives the slightest amount of the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if it, not the entire pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if it receives just the slightest amount of the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he will never settle for the pleasures of this dunya. He will never settle for the pleasures that's found in this world, because he has tasted the sweetness of the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once you have even the slightest amount of pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah says, after that there's no alternative. After that there's no swapping it for something else. Because you've tasted the beauty and the reality of life, which is gaining the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says, yet he receives his pleasure from this life more than those who indulge in it do, untainted in his portion of luxury, unlike those who are indulgent, who are affected by worry, depression, sorrow, and confrontations. He's saying that the one who has the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is going to taste a sweetness in this dunya more than the one who is chasing the dunya. The one who achieves the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is not looking for the dunya. But because his aim is not the dunya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him the pleasures of the dunya. And he will feel more raha, he will feel more comfort than the people who are chasing the dunya. And he says the people who are chasing the dunya, they have what? They have all the depression, they have all the anxiety, they have all the worry, they have all of these things that everyone is complaining about. But he says the minute you turn that door, and you turn your back towards the dunya, and you face towards the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you chase the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you are going to taste what? Allah will give you the pleasure in this life. He will give you a pleasurable life. Because nothing, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be tested. That's something separate. We're saying the pleasure of this world is found in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with you. Right? That's the pleasure of this world. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you this only when what? When will these, the depression, the anxiety, all of these problems, when will they go away? Is the minute you turn your back towards the dunya. And you understand that in Allah's hand is everything. In Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hand is all comfort, all ease. Everything is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even the dunya, your rizq is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you turn towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it doesn't mean you just sit back and you say, I'm just turning towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm not going to work, I'm not going to do anything, we're just going to be on Centrelink therapy for the rest of our lives and that's it. That's not turning towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Turning towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means your heart is attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then you do the asbab, the means, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will barakah in whatever you do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make you mubarak, will make whatever you do, He'll fill it with blessings. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessings are countless. They cannot be numerated. You can't count the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this only comes when you turn your back towards the dunya. Now Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, furthermore, the first individual may receive both blessings in wait for two blessings even greater. And whatever pain he may experience en route can be defined as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, إن تكونوا تألمون فإنهم يألمون كما تألمون وترجون من الله ما لا يرجون. If you should be suffering, so understand they also are suffering as you are suffering. But you expect from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that which they expect not. Don't think that the kuffar aren't suffering. Don't think they don't go through trials and tribulations. Everyone has their problems. Do you think that just because you're a kafir, no one will die in your family? Just because you're a kafir, you think that nothing bad will happen to you? No. They are suffering. They have the same tests. They have the same things happen to them. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you are also going to experience death. You are also going to experience loss. You are also going to suffer. However, you are hoping and waiting for something that they are not waiting for. What is it? The aid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the assistance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is what happens when you are patient with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through your calamity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through your calamity, because over here when someone dies, as a kafir, when someone dies, what happens, right? Generally speaking, it's a bad thing that happened, right? It's a bad thing that happened. Do they expect anything through their patience? Do they expect any sort of benefit through their patience? In this dunya, maybe I'm creating some fortitude, right? I'm becoming a stronger human being, or whatever it is. But you are expecting something. When something bad happens to you, you are expecting something with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That if I am sabr, if I am patient, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant me a reward that has no limit. Yes? If someone is patient, they're expecting this with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're expecting a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For what? Being patient with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed. And then Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, truly, there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah. How deficient is a mind that sells a pearl for dung, musk for waste, and the company alongside those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed from the prophets and the truthful and the martyrs and the pious in exchange for the company of those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has become angry with, cursed, and prepared the hellfire for. What an evil destination. He's saying, same concept as we took, similar to last week, that you sell something that is noble. If I gave you, let's just go back to a car, right? As if I gave you the keys to a brand new Mercedes, and I said, here, you take this. And someone comes with, I don't want to use the example that Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah gave, right? But someone gives you the metal under the horse's shoe, the horseshoe, right? It's just a piece of metal. It's a semicircle, right? And says, hey, you want to do a trade? Do you want to do a trade? I want to give you this horseshoe and you give me this brand new car. You laugh at him. You laugh at him, right? Because the trade doesn't match up. The trade it's not equal. So over here, he's saying, imagine trading something, Jannah for Jahannam. Now, my brothers and sisters, I want you all to understand that in Jannah, I want to go through some of the things that are in Jannah, okay? In Jannah, you get the first blessing, inshaAllah, which is the greatest blessing of Jannah, of seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no blessing greater than this. In Jannah, you get to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the first thing. In Jannah is an Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And you get to speak to a Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam will know you. And you will be greeted by a Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. This is something that is amazing. Then, also in Jannah are the prophets, the rest of the prophets and the messengers. Imagine meeting Adam alayhi salam, Ibrahim alayhi salam, Nuh alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam, and the rest of the prophets. And then after that, you have Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu in Jannah, Umar radiallahu anhu in Jannah, Uthman radiallahu anhu in Jannah, Ali radiallahu anhu in Jannah. This is going to be from the people that you will see. And then on top of that, then you have the rest of the companions. Imagine seeing Hamza radiallahu anhu, Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu. Imagine seeing them in Jannah. Have you ever met a person, right, that when you saw them, they were just gentle, you just enjoyed being around them, they were just nice people. They're just genuinely, you might have met them for a few minutes, but you just experience a comfort in talking to someone sometimes. Just good people, right? And you're like, that guy was a great guy. Oh, wallah, he was a nice bloke, Right? You just feel this. Imagine feeling that, but with every single person you meet. There's no hiqd in Jannah, there's no envy in Jannah, there's no hatred in Jannah. Everyone that you see in Jannah, there's going to be real people that you will interact with, but there won't be any bad interactions in Jannah. There's no anxiety, you won't have social anxiety in Jannah. Right? Every single person is going to treat you as someone who is beloved. Someone who is noble. And on top of that, right, then you have your family in Jannah and no drama. No drama in family. Imagine that. A family with no drama. Wow. And then you have friends. And again, no beef, no drama. No problems. No one's WhatsApping about you. None of that. No problems in Jannah. It's just going to be just a hangout. Literally. And then you have the good food, the good smells. And then you have anything that you wish. All of these things, just the sounds of Jannah. Just imagine, just the sounds of Jannah. It's not going to be boring. It's going to be hectic. Whatever it is, it's going to be good. Right? And you're going to trade this in for Jahannam? Instead of seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're going to see Iblis. Shaytan himself. And then the descendants of Iblis, the devils, the people, creatures who have done horrible things. And then on top of that, you're going to see who? The criminals of this earth. Fir'aun, Haman, all of these criminals. Abu Lahab, Abu Jahl. People who harmed prophets and messengers. How evil do you have to be to harm a prophet and messenger? How evil do you have to be to say, I am God? A'udhu billah. And then you meet people in there. Some people when they're just sabin, when they're just hard, just difficult. Like, think of a Karen, all right? You know the expression Karen, right? Someone who's nat-knitting, someone who's just annoying, right? Anything you do, like you parked and they think that parking spot belongs to them. They're obnoxious, they're arrogant, they're difficult. And then you just hate dealing with them. And then on top of that, they have the nerve to blame you for whatever you did. And then after that, it's your fault for something that you didn't do. Imagine every single person was as annoying as that. And that's who you have to spend entirety with. All time. Forever. Just people who are just evil around you. And then they're going to be blaming each other. You did this to me. I'm here because of you. Ya Allah, give them double the punishment. We're here because of them. This is all recorded in the Quran. Ya Allah, give them double the punishment. They're going to try to get you in more. You're already in the bottom of the pit. You know what I mean? You're already in Jahannam. There's no getting out. Right? And then on top of that, they're trying to get you in more trouble. Why? Is because everyone's going to point the blame game. They're going to try blaming shaytan. Shaytan's like, don't blame me, blame yourselves. Instead of talking to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you get to talk to shaytan. Is that a comparison? And then the foods of Jahannam. Heads of devils, things that are just evil, just horrible. And instead of rivers of milk and all of these beautiful things that we have in Jannah, blood, sweat, pus, akramakumullah. The smells of Jahannam, you think it's going to be good? You think the sounds of people being tortured, it's going to be good? Is that an equal trade? How can someone think that is an equal trade? Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah is saying. How can someone think that you can give Jannah away through, your ticket to Jannah is easy. You just worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, stay away from evil. But when you replace it with sin, you're trading Jannah for Jahannam. That's what you're doing. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, this is not sound intellect. This isn't sound intellect. This isn't reason. This isn't logic. That you trade all of this beauty for all of this evil. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His protection, Ya Rabb. Something about just the angels. Just imagine in Jannah, you see Jibreel, right? You see all these amazing angels. And they're all happy to see you. They're all happy to see you in Jahannam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, Malaikatun ghilab. Stern angels. Angels who were created to have no rahmah upon the people of Jahannam. Because you have to be a specific type of individual that doesn't have any, your heart doesn't sway to see someone after 1,000,000 years get constantly punished. Your heart doesn't sway, you know what I mean? After it's like slack, you know what I mean? No. Poor guy copped it, you know what I mean? He's done It's 1,000,000 years so far. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created these angels specifically with no mercy in them. And they will blame the people again and again and again when they try to what? Try to leave. When they try to beg for water. And then these angels will respond to them in the harshest of ways. No rahmah, no mercy. Is this a fair trade? Are they the same? We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the paradise and nothing other than it, Ya Rabb. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he continues. He says, from the severest punishment to sin is that it imposes a cut in the relationship between a servant and his Lord. Again, something that we have covered previously, but we'll go over this as revision inshaAllah. If this censorship happens, if this cut happens in the relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all the means of good become severed, whilst the means of evil become linked to Him. When you cut yourself from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what happens is that you establish a link. You cut the link with Allah, but you establish a link with shaytan. Because there's no other way. It's either Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the shaytan. The path of Allah, the path of shaytan. There's no third way. Right? So over here he's saying that when you disconnect this link between you and Allah, you are linking yourself to that which is evil. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, what kind of success, hope or life is it when the routes to good have all been severed and the connection between his master, whom he can never be without for even a blink of an eye, is cut, whilst there is no other replacement, in addition to the means of all evil being connected to him, a unity between his own most vehement enemy and finding himself under the persuasion of his enemy whilst his ally has abandoned him. A soul does not comprehend what this severing of ties constitutes from pain and different types of torment. When you leave the connection between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah is saying that you continuously make yourself a friend of an ally and make an ally of an enemy of Allah, which is the shaytan. So he says, how can you expect anything good? How can you expect anything good when someone, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has made him an enemy? Then you make this enemy your friend. You make him your ally, someone who is an enemy to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, what hope do you have? What hope do you have in this life and in the afterlife when you have made an ally of an enemy of Allah? How can you expect something good from that? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you the chance to connect with Him, you've connected yourself with the shaytan. He says, Ibn al-Qayyim, he says, some of the pious predecessors, some of the Salaf, they said, I see a servant positioned between Allah and the devil. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abandons him, the devil consequently receives him. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects him, the devil will not be able to reach him. Similar to the concepts that we've taken previously, that you are between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and shaytan. If you go closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He protects you. And if you are closer to shaytan, then you fall prey to the shaytan. Shaytan will take you. Now don't expect anything other than this. That if the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is removed from you, and if you remove this seal that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places over you from His rahmah, if you remove it, then you are easy targets for shaytan. That's what Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah is saying here. That if you remove the protection of Allah, then shaytan is looking for you. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ كَانَ مِنَ الْجِنِّ فَفَسَقَ عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِ أَفَتَتَّخِذُونَهُ وَذُرِّيَّتَهُ أولياء من دوني وهم لكم عدو بئس للظالمين بدلا. And mention when we said to the angels, prostrate to Adam, and they prostrated except for Iblis. He was of the jinn and departed from the command of his Lord. Then will you take him and his descendants as allies other than me, while they are enemies to you? The tafsir of this, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he gives right after it. Right? He gives the tafsir of this. He says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to his subjects. He's explaining the verse that just came. He says, I have honored your father. Who's our father? Adam alayhi salam. I have honored him, raised his rank, and favored him above the rest of creation. No one is like the human in the form, the humankind is the best creation. Right? In the sense where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored them in this way. And he says, then I ordered all of my angels to prostrate before him and honor him. And a display of dignity. This isn't a prostration of worship. It's a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show respect. And this is just the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is only for him to dictate who this is done to. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has this power. Then he says, they obeyed me. The angels obeyed the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they what? They showed this respect to Adam alayhi salam. But their enemy is his enemy. Their enemy is his enemy. Refused my command and detached himself from obeying me. Shaytan became the enemy of Adam alayhi salam and became the enemy of everyone else by detaching himself from following the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he continues, he says, so how can it then be right to make him and his descendants as allies instead of me, obeying him in my disobedience, allying him in displeasing me, whilst he is the greatest enemy to you? How can you ally yourself with the one whom I have declared an enemy? How have you done this? And how do you make an ally of shaytan? By disobeying Allah as he wants you to do. Disobeying Allah as shaytan wants you to do. That is how you ally yourself with the shaytan. In the disobedience of Allah, that is the call, that is the da'wah of shaytan. He is calling you to that. And when you fulfill, when you do whatever your urges tell you to do from the disobedience of Allah, you have made an ally with the shaytan. And his descendants, those who follow. You know how we say we follow the Quran and the Sunnah in accordance to the understanding of the pious predecessors? Salaf al-Salih. Over here, it's you follow the way of the shaytan and the way of their descendants, the way of the shaytan. Those who follow the way of the shaytan. The descendants of shaytan, those who follow in the path of shaytan. If you disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're not on the path of Allah, His Messenger, and the pious predecessors. You're on the path of shaytan, his descendants, and the way that they follow. Now Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, thus allying with my enemy when I have ordered you to oppose him. I have told you to oppose him. He is your enemy. Allah is declaring him your enemy. So how can you then make him your friend? How can you obey him and make him an ally when I am telling you to oppose him? Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, whoever allies the enemy of the sovereign king becomes equal to the enemy. Whoever becomes an enemy to the sovereign king, he becomes just like the enemy. If you follow the way of the shaytan, you become like shayateen al-ins. You become like the shaytan from the humankind. If you go against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you become like the one who is the enemy of state. It's treason, and not just treason, you become part of them. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His protection, Ya Rabb. As true devotion and obedience can never be accomplished and complete without an enmity to the enemy of the one who you should be obeyed and allying of the righteous. This is simply al-wala wal-bara, loving and hating for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the first thing that you are supposed to love is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And then everything that stems from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. And then the bara'ah, that which you are supposed to hate, that which you are supposed to free yourself from, is the enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is against, you are against. This is what this verse is telling us. This is what you are supposed to do. You are supposed to make an ally with Allah and no one else. You are supposed to make an ally with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is your first point. And anything He allows you to be an ally of, that's who you are an ally of. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates something, you have to hate it. And He says this is the bare minimum. This is the bare minimum, that you are an enemy of who is an enemy to Allah. You are an enemy to whoever is an enemy of Allah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His forgiveness, Ya Rabb. He says, as for your claim that you are an ally to the king whilst you befriend his enemy, this is impossible. If someone says that they are upon a path and this path to them they say is okay. I want you all to think about this. If someone says, then I am an ally to an enemy, but I am still someone with the king. Doesn't make sense. If a king has an enemy, and you say, I'm with the king, but this enemy of the king is also my friend. It doesn't make sense. He says it's impossible. And then he says, this would even be true. This would even be true if the enemy of the sovereign king was not an enemy to you. So how could the case be, since the enemy is also an actual enemy to you, and the enmity that is between you and him is more fierce than the enmity between the sheep and the wolf? Imagine a king had an enemy, okay? But they just have beef. You're not involved in this, okay? The king has an enemy, and that enemy hasn't done anything to you. There's no issue between you and that enemy, okay? Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says it's impossible for you to befriend this enemy and say that you are with the king, even if that person hasn't done anything to you. Now he is saying, imagine if that enemy has also done something to you. He's your enemy too. So now this king has an enemy, and that enemy is an enemy to you. How can you think that you can be friends with him? How can you make allies with him? He is an enemy to you, and he is an enemy to Allah. How is it possible that you can take him as an ally? And he says that it's worse than a wolf and the relationship it has with the sheep. And we've taken this before. The wolf is going to try to eat the sheep whether we like it or not. Right? So over here, shaytan is looking for you, and you are the enemy of shaytan. So you have to take him as an enemy. You have to take shaytan as an enemy. And the way you take shaytan as an enemy is how you don't obey the shaytan and disobey Allah. That's it. Simple. Everyone with me? We nearly finished. I know you guys are all tired. It's cold outside. Time's getting slow. I know, we're nearly finished. Thus, how can it ever be befitting for someone of sound mind and understanding to ally with their enemy? The enemy of their ally and their master, whom he has no other master other than him. Same concept. It's not possible. Imagine you hated someone and you say, this is also my mate now. And not just that, imagine. You both were working somewhere, okay? You had a guy. This person is trying to get you fired at any time. Anytime. He's just looking for anything to get you fired. And he's a miserable person. He steals your lunch. He bullies you. Calls you names. Horrible to you. He sets you like wrong work, and you do that wrong work, and then they'll be like, what the hell did you do? You did the wrong work. No one asked you to do this. And he just set it up for you just to get fired, right? And you only have one boss. And he is sucking up to the boss, right? Hypothetically speaking, I'm saying. Now, how can you know this person is evil. He's stealing your lunches. You're right, don't touch. And he eats it anyway. It's in the fridge, but he just takes it. And then this person is there. And then you can say, this person is my friend. Can you say this person is an ally to me? He helps me. He wants me to succeed. And now he is saying, imagine if that enemy is also an enemy to your boss. So imagine he's from Microsoft and he's working at Apple. Right? He's also against you as well. He's also against your boss. He's a spy. He's doing treason. He's working against both of you. And then how can you think that you can be an ally to him? How can you think that he's your good friend? That he wants good for you? And then he says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forewarned about the evil of such a relationship. He said, وَهُمْ لَكُمْ عَدُوٌ وَهُمْ لَكُمْ عَدُوٌ, that they are enemies to you. The shaytan, they are enemies to you. Just as he has warned against it by saying, فَفَسَقَ عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِ, he departed from the command of the Lord. Shaytan did not obey the command of the Lord, so he abandoned that path. He left that path. And what did he do? He became an enemy to you. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, through this, it becomes evident that the enmity to his Lord and to us is a reason to have enmity against him. If there was nothing else from the shaytan's whisperings, his tricks, his evilness, his corrupt ways, the tries, and all of the things that shaytan does, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah is saying, if it was just the fact that he was an enemy to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and an enemy to you, just that, nothing else, this is enough for you to take him as an enemy. This is enough. You don't need any other reason. This is enough for you to take shaytan as an enemy. And then Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, so why ally? Why do this exchange? How despicable of an exchange it is by the wrongdoers. If you try to trade this ally, your ally, who is it? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your aim is to be an ally of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the helpers for the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you change that and you traded it in to be an ally of the shaytan, he says this is only for those who are wicked, those who are disbelievers, those who are of the wrongdoers. That's the people who do this trade. They take the path of shaytan instead of the path of Ar-Rahman. Last sentence, and then we're all done. We're finished. I know, long class. I'm sorry. He says, this address from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala consists of a subtle and remarkable reprimand. It is that I rivaled Iblis, shaytan, because he did not prostrate to your father alongside my angels. Thus my enmity to him was for you. La ilaha illallah. Yet the result of this is a truce between you and him. La ilaha illallah. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah is saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us the reason why shaytan was mal'oon, cursed, was thrown out of Jannah, left his station as being a worshipper, what was it? Because he refused to make this prostration to Adam, our father. So because of the respect that is given and the honor that is given to Adam alayhi salam, because shaytan disrespected Adam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing this, is making an enemy of Iblis because of this relationship, because of this honor, because of this respect that is given upon Adam alayhi salam, our father. So because of you, he has made an enemy of someone who tried to oppose you. And then he says, you try to then make an ally of someone that I have done this for you. I've done this for you. I'm doing this for you. I've made him an enemy because he refused to make sajda to Adam, your father. Your father. It's not anyone and nothing else. You have the relationship to Adam alayhi salam. Allah created him. But because of that honor that he has given upon him, because shaitan refused to make this sajda, he made an enemy out of him because of this reason. And then you want to go and follow his path and not the path of Allah. He says this is not the way. It doesn't make sense. بارك الله فيكم وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه